One. Hello, everyone, everywhere. Pastor Bob Thibodeau here. Welcome to the Kingdom Crossroads podcast today. We're so blessed that you're joining us. What if the end of your world as you know it isn't something to fear, but actually a doorway of sorts to a truly transformative, deeply personal journey with God? What would that be like? How would that make you feel? Would you be willing to risk it all if you believe this is how you were being led to serve God? Well, that's the type of transformational questions our guest had to answer. And I believe that her quest in answering these types of questions will help you to grow as well. Amen. Today, I'm honored to welcome Jessica Morris, a remarkable author and spiritual director, to discuss her book, Higher Powered: One Woman's Journey of Personal Eschatology. Jessica's story is one of profound transformation, to say the least, from battling addiction and trauma to finding healing and purpose through her faith. In her book, Higher Power, she explores the concept of what she termed personal eschatology, weaving her journey with powerful biblical narratives to help explain this for us. Join us now as we dive into her inspiring experiences, her unique perspective on faith and recovery, and the life-changing message she hopes to share. With that being said, help me welcome to the program, Jessica Morris. Jessica, thank you for taking the time to come on the program and share with our audience. I do appreciate it so much.
Well, thank you, Pastor Bob. What a wonderful, wonderful intro. That you just summed it up. Great stuff.
Amen. Amen. Well, the first question I always start with is this. Other than that brief information I just shared, can you tell us in your own words, who is Jessica Morris?
Sure. Yes. I think most importantly for the audience to know is that I did grow up in I was a preacher's kid. And so my dad was a United Methodist minister, and I'm the youngest of four children that he and my mom had. And I was told early on in my life that I was a mistake in that family. And so that was my original thought of father-daughter relationship. And because he was the one who told me that. And so he was also a minister. And that made me have a very weird idea of what God was. Interestingly enough, though, and I think, part of it due to my mother's faith in Jesus, part of it due to the Sunday school teachers that I had, because of course, I was in Sunday school every week. When your dad's the minister, you're at the church pretty much all the time growing up. And I really fell in love with Jesus very young. And
Amen.
part of that had to do with the fact that in a really weird way, I looked at him as being the abused son, in a very odd way that, God did this to him. It wasn't that Jesus offered himself, it was that God sent him here to be punished by the world. But while that sounds perverse, it always kept me connected to God. Even though I didn't make that connection all the time, I never ever became atheistic or even agnostic. Like I always knew there was a God, even when I left the church. When
Amen.
I went to college, I pretty much, turned my face from the church and said, organized religion is stupid. I'm out of here. Look who God puts in charge. And, I would point to my dad. And so that was, and everything that I was angry at my father for growing up, I became in my own addiction.
Yep.
And denial is a very powerful, powerful tool that the devil uses. For a long time, I just said, well, I'm just having fun. My dad was a jerk. I'm having fun. Like I would always do that sort of thing. But you can only do that for so long. And when God continued to poke at me and poke at me and poke at me, it really came to a place of desperation when I was 29 years old, where I just, it was either, and I had attempted, not attempt, I had suicidal thoughts
Yeah.
For probably about 10 years. It started
Oh,
sometime
wow.
when I was in high school. I remember being in the bathroom where we lived when I was in high school. The first time I really thought about it. And at that point, I had a plan, and then I thought of my big sister, my older sister, who practically raised me. And I thought, if I do this, she's this is going to kill her. Now, of
Mm.
course, that's really egotistic at the
Mhm.
time, but my ego saved me at that point.
Yeah.
And then it was the last time I remember thinking of it was about a year before I got into recovery. I had adopted a cat, and it really was just me and her. And I was serious. The pills were ready, everything. I was ready to go. And she pretty much pranced her little furry butt into the room. And I know that animals don't talk to people, but she basically said to me, "Who do you think you are? I need you." And I had enough. And I remember my sister once telling me that she thinks that cat changed me. And
Amen.
she's right, because I never again thought about it. Never again thought about it. That last year, though, before I get into recovery, was probably the most desperate of my life, because I knew I was stuck here now. Like there
Amen.
was no out
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I
Amen.
had a counselor who pointed me towards recovery. She said, "You have a lot of work to do on yourself, but until you get this addiction stuff under control, nothing's going to take, because it's always going to be in the way." And
Amen.
she was absolutely right. And so
Uh,
recovery brought me to where I could go to seminary. And I mean, gosh, there's just so much I could say about that, but
yeah, amen.
we'll
It's
talk
funny
about it,
because,
I'm sure.
oh yeah, as you're going through this, there's so many similarities between my story. I was brought up in church. My grandmother was a church secretary, so we were
Okay.
there all the time as well. My grandfather was a deacon and all that, and we were in the Lutheran church. So we were there, Sundays, Wednesdays, Sunday night, all the time. And you know, then my dad was an alcoholic, so
Mhm.
I was brought up in that. And he'd been my mother died when I was 18 months old, giving birth to my
Oh,
brother, who died 28 days later. And so I was basically raised by my grandparents. My dad was in and out of prison, married 4 times and all that stuff. And I swore, growing up, that I was never going to drink. I was only going to be married one time, and that's it. And all this stuff. And you know, being in the military, started doing what military people do. And
hmm. Yep.
and you know, my wife and I got in a big argument one night, and ended up the neighbors had called the MPs and all this stuff, and so I was arrested and put down in the slammer till my unit could come pick me up. And when they closed that door, I'm like, drunk, and I was an alcoholic. I mean, by that time, drunk and alcoholic. I'm on the verge of a divorce, and because he was in a prison all his life, I was like, I'm never going to go to jail. I'm not going to drink, never get divorced, I'll never go to jail. And here I am in jail, on the verge of a divorce, drunk, alcoholic. I said, the 3 things I said I'd never do, here they are. And that was a wake up call. Well, we've
Yeah.
been married. We just celebrated our 47th wedding anniversary. And
Wow.
it's been, I quit drinking in November of 1995. And that's a story all to itself, because God delivered me from it and I didn't even know it had happened. I went 6 months and didn't even realize I'd had never had a drink. And
Wow.
but all these things, as I was going through your story, I was like, wow, yeah, I'm checking the boxes, yeah, yeah. Now the suicide, I mean, I was there as well, and when matter of fact, the night I got born again, I was going to commit suicide, and
Yeah.
a direct intervention by God, a literal intervention by God, stopped it. And but so it was just so amazing, your story, and that's what I think was really drawing me into this. Now let's go back to the beginning for a minute. In your journey from battling addictions to becoming an author and a spiritual director, what pivotal moment led you to pursue, of all things, a study of theology, especially in the spiritual direction?
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, God. Uh,
I think
actually,
God has a sense of humor, you know.
yes, it certainly absolutely does. It actually started, there were two moments, one where I ran away and one where I turned back. And the one where I ran away, I speak about in the book as ground zero, which is, I was outside of a party. It was after college, and I won't get into all the details, but I had a moment where I was yelling at God. I was looking up at the sky and yelling at God. I was all by myself and telling him what for and how stupid he was. And, when is it my turn? All that kind of stuff. Very self-pitying victimhood. And Jesus came to me.
Mm.
And I know with every ounce of my being that he was there to my left. I was, looking forward, looking up at the sky, and I knew I could feel him on my left. To this day, I still have a very warm feeling on my left side when I talk about this.
Amen.
And I knew if I turned to my left, he would be there. And it scared me to death. And I ran back into the party. Like I turned from him, the party was off to my right, and I ran back into the party. That was about 6 years before I found recovery. And those 6 years are what I would reference as my personal living hell, my personal weeping and gnashing of teeth, because I had turned my back from his coming to me. He came to me that night, which when I was in seminary, I recognized was his second coming to me. And
Amen.
that was the
Amen.
personal eschatology where he said, I'm right here. Let's do this. It's time for you to let go of yourself because yourself
Amen.
is not working. And I didn't, I wasn't ready, let's say, or my disease wasn't ready, whichever it is, it doesn't matter. I ran back into the party. I spent a lot of time regretting that. Like I wish that I had turned and looked to him because then I would have seen him and I maybe could have hugged him, you know. But I don't regret it anymore because I really believe that those years needed to happen. And
Yeah.
I needed to move to a new place from where I was living then to meet the counselor that I met after my first year of recovery. Someone
Yeah.
sent me to an addictions counselor who never once said what his religion was. Because I don't, in recovery, you don't really speak of outside issues so much as like you say higher power and God, but that's pretty much where it ends. Like people don't say, I'm Jewish, I'm Christian, I'm this or that. It's just we all have a higher power and it's not us. It's very
Amen.
clear,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this counselor that I had was very much like that. But he truly was Jesus in shoes
Mm.
and clothes. I mean,
Yeah.
he
Amen.
very much knew how to connect with pretty much anyone in front of him, no matter where they were. It was amazing to see him work with people. He was calm and peaceful, and I needed to meet him in order to get rid of that childhood junk. He was the
Amen.
one who helped me to be able to really release that pain and to release all of those diseased messages in my head that I either had created on my own or received from my dad.
Yeah.
And
Amen.
so he really encouraged me to follow my writing. We did a lot of journal writing in my work with him, and he encouraged that. And there was a friend in recovery, an older man, real crotchety older guy, who I told that after a meeting one time, I was very proud of myself. I told him I was writing a book about a serial killer. I'm going to become a famous writer one day. I'm going to have a bestseller. I'm writing a book about a serial killer. And he was a war veteran. He had a hat he wore all the time, Korean Vietnam War. He was really a rough tumble kind of guy, had been in prison, you know, ministered to people in prison about the program, all that kind of stuff. And he looked at me and his gravelly voice, he's like, what the F are you doing writing about a serial killer? And I just looked at him like, how so offended. How could he have said this to me? And I said, well, I want to make money off my writing. And he goes, you need to write about something you know. Stop writing.
Yeah.
What do you know about being a serial
Yeah.
killer? And
Yeah.
he told me to start writing about recovery. And I
Amen.
did. And I wrote, my first book was a daily meditation book that I had published in 2014 by an independent publisher. And that's the year I went to seminary. That's the year I decided
Amen.
I need to do this. And I shouldn't say I decided, because
Yeah.
there were several years before that where God was pulling me towards it. And I kept going,
Mhm.
no, 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 my husband probably won't be happy with spending that money. No, like I always had an excuse. And then
Amen.
finally, I didn't hear it in my ear, but it came through me where God said, go to Moravian right now.
Yeah.
And the next
Amen.
day I called, and within 2 days
Praise
I was
God.
enrolled.
Wow. Amen.
I
Amen.
mean, it
Well,
just, it had to
you
happen.
you coined the term personal eschatology as we led to in the introduction. Can you elaborate on that term and how it redefines traditional views of spiritual transformation?
Oh, sure, sure. Eschatology, for anyone who doesn't know, is the study of the end times. So, in theological circles, there are different types of it. Realized eschatology is it's happening now. You know, the Gospel of John is very much where people send you when you want to look at realized eschatology, because Jesus keeps saying the time is now. You know, it's happening right now. You know, then there's apocalyptic eschatology, which is a revelation, sort of a future thing. The book of Revelation is where you would go to look for that. There's other places in the Bible where it talks about that. And there are lots of different ideas about those things. Both of those two that I talk about in the book that I researched are for everyone. Like it's a sort of, it's happening now for everyone, or it's going to happen in the future for everyone. The
Mhm.
end of the way things are now is going to be, and then the new life, the peace is going to come, right? And it's a promise, it's a revelation, it's a prophecy, some might say. What happened to me was when I was learning these things in my Intro to New Testament class, I had this memory of Jesus coming to me that day or that night outside the party.
Amen.
And I thought to myself, you know, all we talk about in this class is how Jesus spoke to people metaphorically, how he used story and symbol to get his message across, and how a lot of people kind of didn't get it. You know, they talk about how some people got it. Even the disciples sometimes would come to him after a teaching and go, what were you talking
Well,
about?
yeah.
You know,
What
like,
was that
I have
about?
no idea what you were saying there. And so people didn't often get it. And it took a while. And I thought, what if he actually meant it was going to be the end of my life as I knew it when he returned? And I started to think about all the people that I've met in recovery and that I've heard tell their stories of transformation, and how the person they were when they were living in their addiction is maybe still in there somewhere. And if they pick up that drink or they pick up the cookie or they go gambling again, whatever it happens to be, that person will rear their ugly head again,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But that person pretty much today in sobriety is gone. It is a
Yeah.
completely different way of looking at life, of living life, of receiving life.
Mhm.
And for me, I realized the Jessica who showed up at her first meeting of recovery is not the Jessica of today. In fact, the counselor who sent me to recovery very soon after I got into recovery moved out of the area. And
Mm.
I never really got to tell her, you know, how good things were going until I went to my first open house at the seminary, and there she was. Here she had done a full circle, and she was now in charge of the spiritual formation program. at the
Amen.
seminary. And I walked, she had no idea who I was. She couldn't put it
I
together.
didn't remember.
Because, well, she remembered once I told her, but she didn't
Yeah.
see it in me because I was completely different. I was changed.
Amen.
The life I
Amen.
knew was gone.
Yeah.
And the life I was living was one of peace. Like to have peace in my addictions are food and alcohol, my main addictions. And to
I'll raise
have
my hand to that.
to have peace in my heart and to not think about food 24/7, because that's my first memory of life. Like my
Mm.
first memory of childhood is stealing food out of my family's cabinets. And to not be thinking about food 24/7, that's a miracle. That's is a complete alteration of my brain. And that's not anything I did. That I
Amen.
mean, I might have showed, like you said, I showed up and I
Yeah.
did the work, but God's the one who changed my brain and changed my heart. And
Yeah. Amen.
anybody who doesn't believe, I say, look, I can't explain it to you, but I can tell you what I was like. And
Yep.
people who knew me then can come up to you and say, yeah, there's a God, because this right here did not happen because
Yep.
she did it.
Yep.
You know,
Amen. That is so
so
true. That is
that's
so
the
true.
personal end of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Amen. When I stopped drinking, I didn't even know I'd stopped drinking. And I mean, I could I could drink just about anybody under the table back then.
Yeah.
And one night I'll never forget it. It was that week between Thanksgiving and the 1st of December, right in that area.
Big
And my
drinking
wife and
time.
I, well, it was, and we were out, and not out, but we were out of alcohol, put it like that. And my
Okay.
wife and I were just sitting there watching the television. I said, I feel like getting a drink. I'm going to go down to the liquor store, get a bottle, and come back. She said, okay. I got down there. And now I'd been born again already. I was born again in 1992, January 25th, 1992, 11:35 p.m. a little Eastern time in a little apartment in Columbus, Georgia. Right, I was there. I know what happened. And but this was 1990, November of 1992. Okay, and so I went down to the liquor store and I'm looking at, I don't know, it's nothing really in here looking good. So I got a little pint bottle of Jim Beam.
Mhm.
Now I could do that by myself in about two drinks, two
Yeah.
glasses. And so I went back home, mixed up a drink, took about drank two or three sips. I said, I'm just gonna go to bed, and went to bed. Didn't think about it anymore. May of the following year, we had a leak under the sink. My wife said, "There's a leak under here. Everything's wet." So all right, so I'm just pulling everything out so I can tighten up the loose fitting, and there's that half full bottle of whiskey. And I said, I haven't had a drink in 6 months. I didn't even know I quit. And then that bottle started talking. And I said, nope, right down the drain it went. Never, you know, never
Yeah.
had another one. Right? Supernaturally delivered from an alcohol addiction and didn't even know it for six
Isn't
months.
that amazing? Oh,
But fast forward to about 30 years later, our family went out to dinner at one of these steakhouses and stuff, and there was no tables for us. So all the girls wanted to, we were in a little area they call the Avenue, a lot like an old fashioned street. All the stores are on the street, not in the mall type thing.
yeah, yeah.
And so they're going to go just window shopping because they said it'd be about a half hour before a table would be ready. My son-in-law and I went up to the bar because there's no seats to sit in, and I ordered a Coke. He ordered a drink, but I ordered a Coke, and I had my arm up on the bar, a glass in my hand, the atmosphere, the sound, the smells, and that spirit came back. And I was like, oh no. I told myself, I gotta go outside. I just gotta, I can't be in here because I
Yep.
just can't do it. That's the
Yeah.
only time in all those
Yeah.
years, the only time that spirit came back to try and
Yeah.
make his way back, and it didn't work. I mean, I identified that thing right off the bat and said, no, I do not need to be in this environment. And that, so yeah, and so I can relate to everything you're saying, because I mean, I'm getting goosebumps right now just thinking about how Jesus supernaturally delivered me from this stuff. And
Well, and
but
such a gift that I'm sorry, but that's such a, I have to just point out what a gift that is for you that you were able to recognize that in the moment,
oh yeah, yeah.
because, and I think I would attribute it to probably your daily walk with Jesus,
Oh, absolutely.
that every day, that's where you start and that's where you stay, because when we're closest to him is when it's easiest for him to protect us.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
when we're far away that, it's hard for us to hear
yeah.
the messages,
Same here.
or when we've got something in between us. And so when you were describing that, I was like, my spiritual director hat came on, and I was like, whoa, like this is Jesus is coming in here and just like putting
Yeah,
a bubble around you,
yeah.
because that old stuff does seem extremely inviting sometimes,
Oh, and
and
like I
it's
said, I
like,
mean, I
whoa,
was in the environment. I mean, I was
yeah,
reliving, like, yeah, this, oh, I mean, I was
yep,
like, I felt like, Elijah,
yeah,
when after he told Ahab, it's not going to rain till I say so, right?
yeah.
And then, God didn't pat him on the back, say, good job, Elijah, kick back, take it. No, he said, run,
Yeah.
You know? Get out of town. And that's what I felt in that moment. I was like, oh, no, nope, nope, I got to get out of here. You
Yeah.
know?
And you followed. What a wonderful thing. You followed
I
that
did, I did,
intuition.
I did.
Yeah.
Well, how did that kind of reframing help to heal your relationship with faith and spirituality that you went
Do you know what? The whole journey towards writing the thesis, which is the actual idea, and then I graduated from seminary right when COVID happened.
through? Okay.
So I had spent 6 years in part-time study looking forward to my graduation and looking forward to defending my thesis in person to a whole bunch of
Yeah.
people looking at me and asking me for questions about what my topic was. You see where I'm going with this. It was all about me. Even though I was writing about personal eschatology and letting go of me, all I could think about was
Amen.
me, right?
Yeah.
And when COVID happened, I nearly lost my mind. Like, how could you, God, I've been working for you for all this time and you're taking away all the rewards from me.
Yeah.
I mean, I know this sounds crazy and I'm kind of overdoing it, but what happened was I was taking a class that last semester called Ignatian Exercises. And part of the Ignatian exercises is to examine oneself.
Ah, ah.
And so
Talk
when
about
this all
timing.
happened, the timing was, dare I say, meant to be perfect.
Yeah.
Um, the I had to they sent us home and we had to start doing Zoom classes um, in March. That's when that all happened.
Yeah.
And it was in April that they were telling us there's not going to be a graduation. Like people were thinking it was going to be 3 weeks, and it ended up,
Yeah.
we all
Oh, I
know what it,
remember that. Yeah, I remember that. It's like
and
two
so
weeks
I
for
knew
this
I
very moment.
wasn't going to have a graduation. I wasn't going to have my thesis in person defense. I was so upset and so angry and so self-pitying. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to take this through the examen. I'm going to do this for my class because I had to do it for a class anyway. And what I saw when I held that mirror up to my face was really ugly.
Mm.
And I recognized, and that's why the book came later after the thesis, because I recognized in that moment that in those 6 years, while yes, I felt called, I felt like God had called me to seminary to learn these things. What I recognized was that I was doing it for me. I wasn't doing it for him. And I needed to die again to that piece of me that needed to get an A, that piece of me that needed to know more than anybody else about God, to that piece of me that was trying to show my dad who had died 7 years, 16 years prior to me graduating. I was still trying to somehow become something that I wasn't. You know, I'm merely a vessel. And however God chooses to use that vessel, that's not up to me. The 5 loaves and 2 fishes is a beautiful analogy, and I can't take credit for that. I watched the show The Chosen. I don't know if you watch it, but the creator of The Chosen had named his company 5 and 2 because he
Mhm.
recognized that for so long he was trying to control the outcome of everything that he was doing. And he realized that he just needed to provide the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. And whatever outcome
Amen.
God chose for that was
Yep.
God's choice, not his.
Mhm.
And that not a coincidence. I started watching that in 2020 also. But you know, I wanted to put the book into the first book that I wrote. Of course, I wanted to make loads of money and become famous and be on Oprah and all that kind of
Oh
crap,
yeah. Yeah.
and guess what? I wasn't. I think it sold maybe 300 copies, if that, Um, but I've had more than one person tell me how much it helped them. And isn't
Amen.
that the whole
That's
point?
the whole, yeah.
you know
Amen.
and so when my thesis advisor asked me what I wanted this to be, what I wanted the book to be, I said, I just want someone else to not have fear of the end times the way that I did, because I
Amen.
sat in that fear for so long. And when it became personal, when it became Jesus returning for me, and not just once, he keeps coming back every time I need him to come back and put that mirror up in front of my face and say, Jessica, stop it. Just stop it. And then once I stop and start to clear off those barnacles, then I'm open again to be the vessel that he can use. But I
Yeah.
have to
Right.
keep I have to keep letting go of those things.
Amen. Your book intertwines your personal story with that of Nicodemus and Lazarus and the Apostle Paul. What inspired you to connect your experiences with these particular biblical figures?
Well, Nicodemus, I can't take credit for because that was I did a directed study specifically on eschatology before I wrote my thesis. And that professor took me right to Nicodemus. He's like, you've got to study this guy and his conversation with Jesus about being born again. And I never would have gone there on my own because I was not a big fan of that verse because I felt it was very overused and people didn't understand it. And so I have to give credit to that professor for taking me to Nicodemus. And I adore Nicodemus now. Like I feel so a kinship with him, because it's sort of, I love when Jesus says to him, You're a teacher. You're a teacher and you don't understand these things. Like,
Yeah.
duh,
Amen. Yeah.
but that's how I feel most of the time, like I'm supposed to know things now. I have a master's degree in theology, and I feel like all I know is how much I don't know. It's just craziness. So that's where that came from. Lazarus was, um, I've always known the story, but my dear friend who I dedicate the book to, he passed away. He was the chaplain where I worked, who also encouraged me to go to seminary. He connected Lazarus to the recovery angle, how Jesus raises Lazarus, but then he looks to the community around him and says, unbind him. Jesus doesn't go and unbind him. He looks to the community of people and says, unbind him,
Amen.
mainly, which is what happens in recovery. We look to each other. It's a community of people that help to get those burial cloths off of us so that
Amen.
we can move freely again. And so that's where Lazarus
Amen.
came from. And then when I was working with my thesis professor, he basically said to me, he goes, the transformation of Paul would be a great, from Saul to Paul, would be a great ending to, because those were the 3 guys I used in my thesis. He's like, this would be a great, you need to study some Paul stuff because I really think that his transformation is a lot. And what I recognized in his transformation is that he never met as far as we know, he never met Jesus, the human, in person.
Right.
He'd
Yeah.
only heard of him. So his personal eschatology truly was that Jesus showed up and said, "Guess what? You're blind. And now you're mine. We're going to
Right.
change the way you're doing things, buddy." And his life went boom, complete 180, and so it was once those guys put those guys in front of me, I went, "Oh yeah, duh. How could I not have seen this?" It seems so clear now. So
Amen.
again, it's not about what Jessica came up with. It's about what she was open to receiving from these people who wanted to help her get there, which I absolutely love that because
Yeah.
I didn't, I mean, I wrote this book, I sat down and wrote it, but it came from so many different wonderful spiritual mentors that, including Jesus, that
Yeah.
I can't really take credit for it. And that's one
Amen.
of the things I love about it is that it's
Yeah.
not about Jessica. It's about, I want somebody to not have fear, and to be able to receive Jesus in his second coming to them.
Amen. Well, with Higher Power now published, are there other writing projects or areas of study that you're currently working on?
Yes, actually, long story short, I worked in the field of higher education for 30 years. I was doing research for the behind the scenes fundraising. I never actually went out and asked for the money, but I did all the research for the people who did. And my husband and I went to my husband about 2 years ago and I said, I would really like to just really make a go of this writing ministry. And at the time, he was not down for it, so to speak. He was like, "No, I want to retire." My husband's a little older than I am. And he's like, "No, I want to retire. I don't think we can do it financially speaking." And that's where it was. Some things transformed in our marriage. God is amazing the way he works things out for us. I continue to pray and do my thing, write the book, try to get it published, which was another long journey that was really a struggle. And things started to not go well where I was working. And that started probably around January of this year, this of 2024, this past year. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And finally, my husband said to me in September, when we got home from our vacation, we go on a vacation in September every year. And I came back to yet another person being fired that should not have been fired. And he said to me, "You know what, Jess, just leave, just do it." He's like, "If not now, when? Make a go of it, see what happens." The book had just gotten published, like I had just found a publisher. And, the fact that I had the faith of my husband gave me the courage to actually make that break. Because after 30 years of having health insurance and an income, that was very scary to
Yeah.
think, uh-oh, I'm going to have to go on his health insurance now, and I'm not going to have an income. What's this going to look like? It's scary. And at the same time, I have more peace in my heart today than I've ever had. And I have no idea where this is going to go.
Yeah.
So I'm doing that. I'm my next book that I would really like to get out. It's the working title is Sun, S-O-N, sunbathing. And what I'm doing with it is I'm meditating on things that Jesus said, and then I'm writing meditative writings on those and have questions for the reader to answer. So like a meditative book with a journal component to
Yeah.
it, since that has been such a huge part of my own personal growth. I want to share that with others.
And now you're helping others to find their own spiritual direction. Can you explain for our listeners what that is and how you go about helping them do that?
Yes, it's a spiritual direction I didn't even know existed until I got to seminary and I needed a one credit class for something. And somebody said, "Here, take individual spiritual direction. It's really easy. There's no final. You just have to learn about it a little bit and write a journal." So I was like, "Oh, great, I can do that." And I was wowed by it. Spiritual direction is a relatively young profession. And I say profession with bunny ears around the word profession, for lay people. It's been done by Catholic priests for hundreds and hundreds of years. But it's basically what, the elevator pitch is. I'm sitting with someone and I'm holding the space with them as they journey with their higher power. And so I'm there it's very hard for us to see things when we're right in the middle of them.
Yeah.
But when there's someone with us who is non-biased, really, not part of our own little journey, it's easy for them to go, well, wait a minute, did you see where God, or to ask questions that lead someone to even finding it themselves. And so it's not counseling. A lot of people think it's counseling. It's not counseling. It's just basically walking with someone on their journey and
Yeah.
helping them to see things that they may be blinded to or they may not be able to see yet.
Jessica, this has been so interesting. And I know you've probably sparked a lot of questions in the minds of some of our listeners. If someone wanted to ask you a question, get in touch, receive more information, how can they do that? How can someone get in touch with you?
It's so easy. There's a contact form on my website. It's jessicalmorris.com. And that's the easiest way to find me. And the books are both available on Amazon.
Amen. I'll put links all this in the show notes below. Amen. Folks, Jessica Morris has shown us that the concept of personal eschatology is more than just an idea. It is a transformative journey of renewal and faith. And through her story and insights that she shares through her book, Highest Power or Higher Power, One Woman's Journey of Personal Eschatology, she invites us to confront our own challenges, heal from our own past, and embrace our own deeper relationship with God. And I want to encourage you, drop down the show notes right now, click the links right there, get in touch with Jessica, ask your questions. Be sure to subscribe to her blog and definitely, most definitely click the link to order her book, Higher Powered. Amen. I mean, just consider how your own personal journey, like Jessica described, could lead to a personal awakening and a renewed sense of purpose in your life, your ministry, your career, and how impactful that'll be on your family as well. Amen. Just drop down the show notes right now. Click the links right there. Reach out to Jessica. Amen. Jessica, I want to thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule. Come and join us today and explain all about your practice and your book, Higher Powered. I do appreciate it so much.
Oh, thank you, Pastor Bob. It's been a pleasure.
Folks, that's all the time we have for today. For Jessica Morris, myself, this is Pastor Bob reminding you to be blessed all that you do.